everyone. It's Terrence Branley with the Grow IT Partners, and today I'm lucky to have Benafsha Irani. Did I say it correctly?
Yes, thank you.
Awesome. Who is the co-founder and managing partner of West Coast Consulting Group. I think they're probably one of the longer-running cloud experts that I've talked to. You hear a lot of cloud consulting firms, that popped up in the last several years, but they've been at it since 2004, and I'm really excited to have you on the show today.
Thank you. Thank you.
Yeah. So tell me about your background. Tell me about your entrepreneurial journey.
Sure, sure. So I started working at American Management Systems in Denver, Colorado, where I worked on customer care billing systems. And I guess at that time it wasn't called CRM. And then after that, I went to work for KPMG Consulting, where I was in senior management. And I managed the GTE account, which basically became GT and Bell Atlantic merged and they became part of Verizon.
Yeah.
So then Verizon IT was my account at KPMG, where we helped retail IT operations. And when KPMG kind of went and became Bearing Point, a lot of people there was a lot of flux, etc., in the organization. So at that point, I decided to join Verizon. I was given an opportunity. So I was I was the youngest executive directors at Verizon, and I came from the outside, and they wanted some outside in approach. And so I managed retail IT operations, the FTTP. My first assignment was, and I'm going to date myself, but it was to merge the local landline, long distance, and wireless websites into one. So somebody had written an email to Ivan Seidenberg and said, "Hey, how come I have to go to 3 different websites to do something?" And I hired a design firm in New York and RGA, and then we came up with the ordering system. So like when you move, right, and your landline has to go, and your long distance and your ordering. So the ordering actually took 35 minutes to do as a self ordering app. And by the time we deployed it, we came down to 11 minutes. And it's not like trivial, right? You're connecting to outdated or like ancient backend systems that have enormous amounts of data, and each thing has how you do wiring, how you actually would tell the line person to go connect the phone. Then you have provisioning, you have getting the number. So all this is in completely different separate systems, and we connected to all these systems to actually make the front end like the person be able to order their phone in 11 minutes. So that's kind of my background.
So I'm gonna jump back to our before we got on the podcast, and I joked and said, "Hey, don't worry, no one watches the entire full length of our podcast here, right? Unless they're related to you." And I probably now, with that said, my parents will probably listen to this. So the reason being is that both my parents worked for and retired from the phone companies. So they worked for which back then in the 60s and 70s and 80s, and I'm dating myself, it was Bell, like you mentioned. And then when it split up, when I think it had to do with antitrust laws, when we split them up, my mom went to work for, I think it was Pacific Bell, that ended up becoming Verizon, that side of it. My father went to work for AT&T. My father was a lineman, one of those linemen that you talked to. My mom was a manager of the customer service department that dealt with the same issues you're talking about in terms of connections and whatnot. So now they're going to be thrilled to hear that they're actually brought in this. Now my parents, I guarantee, will listen to this full length, podcast today. But that's a great background, and it ties into my family. So I appreciate it. And you probably lost half our audience when you started talking about landlines connecting with phone lines connecting with FTTP, but we'll know.
Yeah, and just like finally answer your question. So I was a million mile traveler. So my office was in New York. I lived in San Francisco. So every week I traveled, and then I had teams in Tampa. I had teams in Philadelphia. So within the week, I was also traveling. And at one point, I decided that, hey, I want to, and that's why I named the company West Coast Consulting Group. So I started it with two other KPMG partners, and we said, let's call it West Coast Consulting Group. So that's where the name came from, because we said we want to do local business, right? We don't want to
We don't want
travel
to
on the
keep going
plane.
all over the place.
But then we got projects in like Egypt. Like we worked on some wireless
And they didn't
integration.
care. They said, we don't care if you're West Coast Consulting, East Coast Consulting. You're going to have to come all the way over here and help us because we
And
need
then
you.
and we recently did a project in Saudi Arabia. So like it's kind of like, so yeah, it's West Coast. And so now I tell people it's West Coast on, like every continent has a West Coast. It's not just America. So
Okay,
so
let's talk about. We started delving into Egypt and the Egyptian clients in Saudi Arabia. Tell us about the problems that or the challenges that your clients are trying to solve, or what are their what are the outcomes that they're looking for you to get to help to have you help them get to. Like what are you helping them with?
So I would say the main thing that customers like I said, we've been doing cloud business since 2004 and right now. So I would say the main problems that people are trying to solve is, hey, how do I make my sales and opportunity pipeline visible to management? Because and then also have like most of the top salespeople, they're like, hey, I have it all in my head. I have my own system. Don't bother me, right? And so it's like, how do you get those top sales guys to say, hey, this can also benefit you and the team, and how you do business, and the other key thing is tying it to finance, right? So kind of like the salesperson is interested in the commissions, and so when you bring that in, then you solve that problem, right? Like you kind of connect the two, and then people are listening, right? So what we do is we help people. So it's not just implementing a system. You could have a cloud system, a non-cloud system, and you just can't think of it as a system. You have to think of it as, hey, there is a person who does the work in the system. There are processes that the company wants them to follow, and then what's the outcome? So that's one, that this long time now, at I think at an average, if any, it would be 2 years, right? So people are constantly changing. uh, People are like, like a lot of teams are offshored, onshore. There's like a lot of things where people in their own company are not meeting, like especially after COVID, people are not meeting their staff. Like they don't know who they're working with except on these online meetings, right? So kind of bringing that all together is where people are interested. And of course, now there's AI and data. So a lot of people are also thinking of bringing things back in-house. So there's a lot of that movement going on as well.
You touched on a lot of stuff that we're gonna get to, but let me ask you this: when you talk about considering bringing it back in house, are you talking back in house, meaning from the cloud back to on prem?
I would say, like, so if you look at the like if you also observe the stock market, you'll find like companies like IBM and Oracle, and even Nvidia, right? They're all going up because a lot of people are now buying, and creating a lot of the, like, they don't want to put their data, like they have data in different systems. Like, you'll have data, your sales data in Salesforce, and your customer success data, and you might have some custom applications. But then your key data, for example, we work for a healthcare company that did kidney dialysis equipment. It was a startup that wanted to let people take the dialysis machines home and do the dialysis themselves. And so they didn't put that data out there on the cloud. So there's a lot of hybrid models, right? Like, so people are putting some data out there, but when it comes to going through the data, and then, the security breaches that are happening, etc., people are putting a lot of their sensitive data on prem. So that's kind of a trend that's happening.
Interesting. Okay. So you had mentioned a couple different types of client types there. Not only in industry, you mentioned healthcare, but even size, right? Like I noticed one of them you were talking about is salespeople and dealing with upper management. Now always tells me, hey, that's probably more like mid market or enterprise. But you also just mentioned like that healthcare that was a startup. Maybe talk about the different sizes and types, even the industry of of companies that you're working with.
Sure. So we are actually very like we are not defined by size. So we work for companies like PeopleSoft when they were still PeopleSoft. They call us in to do a strategy project. We work for the city and county of San Francisco. We work for the state of Connecticut, doing a collections app for them. We work with a lot of healthcare customers where we help them, when the whole EHR stuff happened, right? The electronic health records. And so we've done a lot of work in that space as well. So we have, and then we have startups and we have nonprofits. We've done a lot of work in education, so healthcare, nonprofits. And we also have done work with a lot of startups ranging from, people who are doing legal analytics.
Yeah. Well, let's talk about success stories. This gives you an opportunity to brag about the great things that your firm does, aside from jumping on airplanes and going across to Egypt and to Saudi Arabia, but really more importantly to talk about some of the success stories that you've had with your clients and that they would deem success. So maybe give us a couple of examples of some maybe some recent ones.
Sure. So a good example would be First Day Data Bank that comes to mind. It's a healthcare company, and so we were brought in because they had a um, outdated system for CRM. So their sales and their opportunities and their customer care was all in the system. And by the time they did, just had to go to the next release of the software because this was on prem. It would take them 2 years just to get to the next release of the software and like upgrading the databases, etc. So that's when they decided to go in the cloud. They decided to go with Salesforce. And what we help them do is kind of map through all the information from their old systems, their existing system. And this was complicated stuff. They had pharmaceutical data, and they actually, so whenever you look at a prescription on you, when you go to a pharmacy and pick up medication, you will see it will actually give you the dosage information. Now that it in fine print will tell you provided by First Data Bank.
Mm-hmm.
And if you look at the Epic system that a lot of the hospitals use, Epic uses First Data Bank data, right? So they have a lot of complicated information, and they deal with pharmacies, they deal with pharmaceutical companies, they deal with healthcare providers. And so we actually brought all that data and their processes. I mean, they were they're very complicated, and we worked with the internal IT team. So they had the internal IT teams, and we had to follow a lot of their PHI and like the HIPAA compliance, and then make sure everything was according to healthcare standards. And so we did all that work and brought them into into Salesforce successfully. And they've been using Salesforce ever since then. And they had a lot of acquisitions as well after that. And so all those companies also came into Salesforce. So it was a very integrated system. And Hearst Health, which is their own, like the main parent company, they can see day data across all the different organizations that they have.
That's in healthcare. I mean, and you said you cross a lot of different industries. What other industries do you have some success stories?
So yeah, so I can talk about city and county of San Francisco. So um, we actually worked with the board of supervisors department, and they had they wanted to have a constituents management system and a monthly newsletter system that actually uh, can, across all their district offices. So each district office is its own entity, right? It's its own, like they govern their district, right? So they have their own data, they have their own issues, they deal with different types of constituents. And like, so if you look at District 2, that's kind of in a fancier neighborhood, or if you look at District 11, that's not in a fancier neighborhood. So each one has like very different things that are there, and they have to manage their data separately, right? Like you don't want to mix that up. So it's quite complicated. So we divided the whole Salesforce database into 11 logical databases, so that they can share data that they want to share, but then they don't share data that they don't want to share. And then from a marketing standpoint, each one was allowed to, like, they can send their newsletters to their district, they can manage their own subscribers, etc. So I mean, and it's a huge success. And so they are actually using the system and tracking constituent information. An example is District 4. They have this really cool thing called the Fix It form. And they actually, like, any constituent can write that something is not working. And then immediately the district aides would work with the constituent and that area, and then make sure that stuff is happening. So it's been a big success.
Well, I have to tell you too, that's pretty impressive to be in the Silicon Valley backyard and to have San Francisco, and to be able to do work for them. I mean, there's not a lack of IT professionals, IT consulting firms right there in the backyard, and so you guys must be pretty good if you're tapped on to by the largest city, the most recognizable city in Silicon Valley.
Cool. Thank you. Thank you.
Yeah, you're very welcome. Okay, so let's talk. You mentioned AI. Let's jump into that warm water there. You have AI. You have large learning models. That's the dominant trend, right, in IT. How are you seeing those conversations out in the marketplace, both with prospects and clients, in terms of everything from, hey, what should we do? What should we look at? Talk, what are the conversations like going on in the boardrooms and among executives with respect to AI?
So I think most people are using the term AI for everything, right? They're like if they run a report, they think like they're doing AI, but AI is really the model where you are like, the system is learning from you. And a lot of times for that, you need a lot of data for you to be able to help the model become more efficient. So I would say, like, for small business and mid-market businesses, that's something that they don't have enough data to actually run these AI models. Now, if you look at a bank like Capital One, where we've done some work, they actually have been testing out, and we did some AI work, which I can't go into much detail about, but
Mm-hmm.
somebody like that has the capability to do, and has enough data to make value out of it, right? And I would say that, I mean, for our collections app, that's something that we've toyed with. So it's called Cloud Collect. It's a Salesforce native app that we have. And so we are trying to connect different companies and see if they want us to build a model where we can actually take collections data and then tell them who's most likely to pay, and then go after those customers, so that you can actually work the model, right? Like, so you're not wasting time
You're
calling the
deploying your
person.
resources in the best manner possible.
Yeah, yeah. And it's not just saying, oh, I have a credit check, like their credit data, because that's not helpful. The model would tell you more about, who's paying, how are they paying, how did they pay, like collecting different parameters and then making them pay. The other thing on AI, I think that would be really useful would be, like, during COVID, we built a map where for the city and county of San Francisco, we were showing where were the washrooms, where were the bathrooms, for COVID related things, right? Like
Mhm.
when are the libraries opening? Where are the COVID centers where you can go do things? Now, um, I mean, it's hard, but if you take something like that and you say, okay, all cities would start using that data, then you could actually make that into a model where you could, when the constituents looking for something, you could say, hey, you know what? Here's a social community resource, especially like around homelessness, right?
Mhm.
You could do a lot of things like that using AI models, which would be really, really cool. So I think that's where you can use it to do mining. And then we did some of that sort of, I mean, we didn't call it AI then, it was called data mine, like data mining at one point, right? And so when we were at Verizon, we would try to get all the customer data and try to get a 360-degree view of a customer. So that's kind of like the term is now AI.
So I have a question for you, and you touched on it, right? The organizations that have a large amount of data, like the Capital One's Verizon. Verizon must have a treasure trove of data, but obviously smaller, more mid-sized firms or ones that are more recent, right? That maybe have come about in the last several years don't have as much data. Is there a way for them to maybe aggregate data along with other organizations that are similar to them, or where maybe? And let's do the crystal ball thing and kind of try and take some
Sure,
guesses
sure.
here, right? Because the larger organizations, that's easy. They have, like we said, just a chest of data. But how do the other firms kind of leverage, AI and LM? Because it's only as good as the data that is feeding into it.
Yeah, so I think realistically, like kind of going back to that map example, right? Or homelessness, right? If you took that example and then if you made like cities agree to saying, hey, let me solve homelessness using AI, and let me actually use this model, like kind of a map where like one of the ideas is, hey, let a constituent walking on the street, when they see a homeless person, I mean, they're not going to have a phone, right? I mean, they're not going to call anybody for help. I mean, if they could, they would have got the help they needed, right? So if people around them can start helping, putting their photos, start collecting that sort of data, connecting them back to family members, doing all sorts of things like that, that's when you can actually make that model work, right? Or in healthcare, if everybody decided, as an example, I'm just taking the kidney dialysis, right? I mean, but the barriers would be so huge in healthcare because you're dealing with patient data, is that if you build a model like that and then all the healthcare companies could use it, I mean, that would be phenomenal, right? It could help everybody. So that's kind of where something like that would be beneficial. Now, a lot of companies, what they're doing right now, they're just using the open AI, like interfaces, or like, the APIs provided, and they're pulling some things into their organization. So that's the extent of what people are doing, right? Like kind of bringing some of like the smaller companies, that's what they're doing with AI.
It'll be interesting to see. Well, let's switch gears a little bit and talk about growth challenges. And you were joking about the name of your company or naming it West Coast Consulting to try and keep it geographically aligned so that maybe you weren't becoming the million-mile club every year. But that didn't help, right? Because now you're going to Saudi Arabia and Egypt and all over the place. But what are some of the challenges that you faced with growing the firm, both in the past and even now?
So I think the landscape keeps changing. So I mean, I'll give you a great example in the sense. So we focused a lot on solar, and we had built an app for the OEMs, the installers, right? And so I mean, it was a complicated model where we work with some of the solar installers, and they said, hey, it depends on the roof size and the roof, like the type, if it's shingle or tile or whatever, and then what angle it is at, and then what's their home reading. So there were these complex models that were out there, right? And so we built all that. And then depending on the political climate in the country, and how the federal government is allocating funding, etc., a lot of those things get impacted, right? So the whole solar model changed. And then what happened is the installer initially was getting a lot of the profit. Then the investors started actually getting most of the money. And then the installer was not getting much, right? So then that whole model changed. So then you build this great app and it's like it's of no use, right? So a lot of those sort of challenges happen. Or like if you look at healthcare also, right? Obama started the whole prep, like the whole Obamacare and going EHR, etc. And then when Trump came into power, the whole landscape changed, where they were like, all the healthcare companies were like, wait a minute, we're not sure which way it's, the wind's blowing, we don't know what's going to happen. All those all those outside factors are impacting business quite a bit. And then there's huge technology changes on top of that, right? And there's competition from, different vendors. And, I mean, it's ever changing, right? So you have to take into account all those things and decide where you want to play and hope that things don't change too much. So
But, being an entrepreneur is not easy, and you guys have been doing this for 20 years, and you bring up a lot of valid concerns, right? That are both politically driven, which are outside of our control,
completely outside, yeah.
along with all the other challenges that come. That you can be in business for 20 years and have a great reputation, and be in a healthcare industry, let's call it, and then next thing you know, political changes happen and completely turns that whole industry upside down, which then has a ripple effect to your business. And it's
Right.
there's it always seems like whenever people are like, oh, owning your own business must be easy, right? And it's like, yeah, me too.
Yeah, if I had to advise my own self back then, I'd be like, oh, and sometimes I think, would I advise myself differently? I don't know. So it's like, I'm torn. But I think, yeah, I mean, I was doing really well in corporate too. So
I've had the same. I've had the same look backs, right? Because I worked for a medical device company back in the late '90s, and was doing well financially. Had great like stock options. I still have a lot of those stock options, and I was like, man, here I was, this glutton for punishment, being an entrepreneur and buying and starting a number of different businesses. And if I had just stayed with I won't say their name, but a great medical device company. And again, I think that's something to be said. Either we're gluttons for punishment. There are things that they're good and bad at both, but
I
I
think
had the
I think
same
there's
look.
a lot of flexibility, and I think you can actually also kind of like if you decide to want to do like government work, you can do it, right? Because you're making that decision instead of let's say when I work at KPMG, I worked in the telecommunications organization. So then I could only work on telecommunication organizations, and I couldn't work with high tech because that was a whole different group. So there's like pros and cons to doing things like that. And then like you can make your own decisions what technologies you're using internally. You decide like make processes more efficient. So there's like pros and cons of being like an entrepreneur. And I think I think if you are a good entrepreneur, you should be a strong risk taker. I think that's my key advice. Like if you're not used to taking risks, don't be an entrepreneur, because I mean it's not easy. It's not for you.
I could not agree more, and I would say that you have to have a higher degree of risk tolerance, and you have to also be prepared. The highs and lows are
And
much
changes and
are
changes.
much higher and much lower than you would if you were working at, let's say, Verizon or KPMG still, and I was still working for that medical device company. I guarantee you the highs and lows would not be what they are, and that's good and bad, right?
Yes, yes, definitely. Yeah, there's some days where you think, oh, it would be cool to go work somewhere and and just do what they tell you to do. So yeah.
Well, listen, as we wrap up here, what's a good way for a prospect to reach out to you guys to learn more about West Coast Consulting, to maybe follow you? I know you're on LinkedIn, so we'll include the link there. But what are some good ways for them to learn more about you? Maybe even reach out to you guys.
Sure. So they can go to our website, westcoastconsulting.com, or they can email us at info@westcoastconsulting.com, and or they can call us at 415-626-3493, which is our phone number. So, but yeah, we actually do pick up the phone. So
I was just gonna say it's pretty rare these days that someone will actually give out a phone number. And this is now I'm gonna have my mom and dad watch this to the very end
well, I
because they'll
work
be
for a
so
phone
impressed, right?
company.
Because they retired before the internet, really exploded, and so you're really gonna make them happy. They're definitely gonna watch this entire one.
Sounds good. Thank you.
Well, Vanessa, I've really enjoyed our conversation. I look forward to the next one that we have.
Okay, thank you, Terrence. Bye
Thanks for
bye.
coming on.